Welcome to Reclaiming Me, a trauma-informed podcast helping women with complex PTSD heal the lasting impact of childhood attachment wounds from parents and caregivers, so you can finally release people-pleasing and perfectionism and learn to trust in relationships, beginning with the one you have with yourself. I'm your host, Cindy Payne, therapist, trauma specialist, and a woman who has walked this path both personally and professionally.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another full-length episode of Reclaiming Me. I am so glad that you joined me today. I just want to jump right in and talk about why it felt so vital to dedicate an episode to the concept of the good client. So as a therapist, I see it every day. Brilliant, self-aware people who show up to session and they do the work. They use all the right clinical language, and yet they still feel stuck. But I don't just see this from my chair. I happen to know this struggle very intimately because for a long time, I was that person. I spent decades perfecting the art of being easy to love, easy to help, only to realize that I was still disappearing in the therapeutic process. And so we're addressing this today because awareness is not the same thing as healing. You can know your history forwards and backwards and still be stuck in a cycle of auditioning for safety. And so this episode today is for anyone who feels like they are still performing wellness instead of actually experiencing it. So it's time to talk about what happens when our best survival tool, our intellect, becomes the very thing that keeps us from truly being seen. And so whether or not you are actively in therapy, have been in therapy in the past, never been in therapy, and maybe you're entertaining the idea of starting therapy, then I think this episode will have something for you. I want to just start off by sharing a memory. And I am 13 years old in this memory, and I'm sitting in a therapist's office for the first time as an adolescent. It was not my first time to receive therapy. I received therapy as a child after my grandparents assumed custody of my sister and myself, but it was short-lived. And to be honest, I don't really even have that clear of a memory of therapy. I was just told that we saw a therapist. And so by the time 13 years old hits, I was an adolescent and I had been through many experiences that I don't believe a child should have had to have gone through. Witnessing my mother's mental illness struggles and my father's absence. Those were two huge factors, along with moving in with my grandparents, that created this perfect storm, classic adolescent cry for help. And so by the time I sat in that chair at 13 years old, my world was, I guess you could say, already layered with a deep and very complicated type of grief. As I mentioned, my biological father was an unpredictable presence in my life. His love felt erratic. It felt hit or miss. And it felt entirely conditional because it was. And so looking back, I realized that I wasn't just a child. I was an auditor. I was constantly performing and auditioning for my father's affection. And at the same time, my mother had been institutionalized at least 5 times by the time I was 13 years old. And so at this age, I was already carrying an adult's worth of survival strategies. I knew that I needed support, but I also felt a crushing weight of shame for needing that support. I really honestly, at the time, thought that my job in that room with that new therapist was to be good, to be the easy client, to be the client that appeases and pleases the therapist. Because when your home life is chaotic, you learn very quickly that being, quote, easy is the only way to stay safe, even in a therapist's office at the age of 13. And so just to expand on that context and, talk a little bit more about finding a fit amidst all these layers of complex trauma, I just want to give a disclaimer again that this episode and this show overall is not intended to be a replacement for therapy. And I am by no means saying that therapy is the only surefire way to heal. I respect and believe that there are many healing modalities that happen both inside of a therapist's office and in other caring communities. And so if therapy is not your thing, or maybe you've been turned off by therapy in the past, I hope that you'll still stick around through this episode. And who knows, you might change your mind or change your thinking by the end of this episode. So again, whether you are already in therapy or you're just starting the search, this episode really is more about the blind spots that we develop when we've spent our lives auditioning for love. And we're going to talk about why you might still feel like you are disappearing in the therapy room, even if you're doing all of the work. And also, how to find a therapist who can meet the layered parts of you without you having to perform for them. And that is really huge because, many of the clients that I work with, they will tell me, I'm just so tired of having to tell my story again, almost kind of like I'm auditioning for them, and then it falling short of what I had hoped that the experience would be. So let's focus on the shift from talking at someone to really being with someone. And there's a huge difference. The talking at, I'm just going to refer to this as the intellectual performance. So going back to my teen years and then again in my 20s and 30s, I did what I knew to do, which was to become the expert on my own trauma. I really had a deep understanding of the degree of what I'd lived through. In fact, I'd sat in therapy offices as a child and was told, you're so aware. You're so mature for your age. I even had a therapist at one point tell me that I was an old soul, which that's very cringe to me. I think that's really damaging, in my opinion, to call children old souls because we just didn't get the opportunity to be children, more than likely. So we had no choice but to be the mature old soul. But nevertheless, even in therapy, I felt during this time a deep disconnection. It felt like therapists were talking at me, analyzing the layers of my mother's mental illness or my father's absence instead of really working with me. And during that time, I have to say, I was the perfect client. If you were a newbie therapist, man, you were hitting the jackpot when you had me because I knew all the right terms and I knew what to say and I knew to ask for homework and I would complete that homework and I would turn it in like a good student waiting for the gold star. But the honest truth was that I felt incredibly lonely in the room. So if you've ever felt like you are performing wellness or awareness for your therapist, then you know exactly what I mean, because you're still auditioning. And there was a turning point to this, which I know now is called brain to brain attunement. And this shift happened when I met my current therapist, and she was and remains a therapist that didn't just give me a better diagnosis for my complex trauma history, but she did something that no other therapist has ever done for me, and she provided a container. And the container was this brain to brain attunement. And the best way I know to describe it was that it was a visceral sense that my nervous system was being tracked in real time, not just through memories of stories that I would tell her, but how it was showing up in my body in the present moment. And at first, I have to be honest, I wanted to call bullshit on this. I thought that it was like all part of her act, and I was not trusting at all. And she would email me follow ups to our sessions with things that she noticed and pointed out. And I remember just sitting with the discomfort. But I also remember feeling like, you know what? There's something about her approach that I want more of, but I don't feel like I have the access to at this point because I haven't had the exposure. I haven't had the practice. But I'm going to hang in there with her, and I'm going to keep showing up, and I'm going to keep giving her chances, and I'm going to keep trying to stay as curious as possible because, again, her approach was unlike any other therapist's approach I had ever experienced before. And now I can look back and say that it was because I wasn't being analyzed as a case of CPTSD. I was just being met as a human. I didn't have to be the good client or the perfect audition anymore. I just had to be there. And one little side note story that I'll share is one of the first sessions that I ever had with her stirred up a ton of emotion inside of me, which, again, this was new for me because all the other therapists I had been to, I wasn't able to cry. I would sit in there and I would report things as if they'd happened to somebody else. But I was explaining to her the challenges that I was having as a mother connecting with my oldest son because there was so much in him that felt so familiar to me when I was that age. Like I could really understand my child, but I just couldn't convey that to him. And so I began to describe the ways in which I had launched into being the perfect mother. I had tried for this baby. This baby was wanted. We had done several rounds of infertility treatments. And then, I went back to work when he went to kindergarten and I became a teacher, but then I would make sure that I would be home in time so that I could spend time with him. And it was almost like I was qualifying all the ways that I had done right by him, but that I was still deeply struggling with my own fear and my own shame. And after I had listed all the ways in which I had checked all the boxes for doing a good job, but I was still struggling, she just looked at me in a really tender, empathetic way. And she had tears in her eyes. And she said, "Wow, you've really been hustling hard." And it was not said in a judgmental way. It was said in a "I see you" way. Like, you're tired. You've been doing all the right things and you love your kid and you're so scared to screw this up. And I just felt seen. And all I had to do again was just be there in the room, and I felt held. And so I want you to pay attention to some key takeaways, which I'll call the blind spots for this episode. And number one is that awareness of self is not integration. I call this the audition blind spot. So understanding the erratic nature of your past is a start, but that's all it is. Because if your therapy remains purely intellectual, then you are still likely in audition mode. Healing happens when we move from talking about the trauma to experiencing safety in the present moment. And number 2 is that attunement is the antidote to performance. And I would call this the fit blind spot. So when looking for a therapist, look for the feeling of being tracked. Not in a creepy way, but for those of us who grew up with conditional love, we need a therapeutic container where we can be messy, we can be disconnected, we can be all over the place without the fear that the therapist will withdraw or judge us. So by tracking the client, what we're doing is we're allowing the client to just show up however they show up. If it's all over the place, okay. Let's just work with what we got, right? And then third, your inner protector is a loyal witness. That part of you that wants to be the good client is the same 13-year-old who survived the hit or miss nature of my bio father and the instability of my mother's health. We don't try to fix that part anymore. What we do is we lead it with softness and stillness and slowness. So the first blind spot, that we have to just jump right in with is this belief that, again, awareness is the same thing as integration. And I don't know about you, but one of the most annoying things that I can hear as a therapy client is, you're so self-aware. I mean, duh. As many of you know from our previous episodes here on Reclaiming Me, my intellect was always my best survival tool. I learned early on to stay 3 steps ahead of the chaos by being the smartest person and the most observant person in the room. But here's what happens. You don't leave that survival tool at the door when you enter the therapy room. You bring the audition with you. For years, I was the star pupil of therapy. I could explain my father's erratic behavior and my mother's hospitalizations with clinical precision. I had the awareness, but I was still choosing attachment over authenticity. And if you'll remember, this is a concept that Dr. Gabor Mate speaks about so powerfully. I've mentioned him in previous episodes, but really it came down to the belief that if I wasn't good or self-aware for my therapist, that I would lose that connection, just like I feared losing it at 13 years old. So if you find yourself preparing for therapy like it's a job interview, or if you're reporting on your life with clinical detachment, you are most likely in that audition blind spot. As Bessel van der Kolk teaches us in The Body Keeps the Score, your brain might have the facts, but your smoke detector, which is your amygdala, is still screaming that it isn't safe to be real. Healing doesn't happen when you find the perfect explanation. It happens when you move from talking about the trauma again to experiencing a felt sense of safety in the present moment. It shifts from saying, I know why I'm scared, to finally feeling I am safe enough to be still in this room right now. Integration is the moment that the audition finally ends. And just a side note for listeners, I did not experience this right off the bat with my current therapist. I mean, remember, I said I was like calling bullshit on it. It irritated me at first when she would send me follow-ups and give me all of this positive feedback and ask me to be tender with myself. But I think I was really trying to push away being seen in that vulnerable manner. So it took me a lot of time and a lot of patience from her to be able to enter into this container that felt safe for me. So just know that this is going to take practice through this relationship, because that's what that is, right? It's not like you're just going to this all powerful Oz for this person to give you the key to the kingdom. It's like, no, I need to be in like a trusting relationship with somebody who can hold me and hold my messiness and allow me to show up however I show up. So the second blind spot is how we evaluate fit. And for those of us with CPTSD, our filter is often broken because we are used to being the accommodating one. So we look for a therapist who is a great teacher. But as I found in my own journey, I didn't need more teaching necessarily. I needed more attuning. And this would come up often in our sessions when I would say, I've read all the books. I know why I do this. And she would just sit there patiently and she'd be like, I know you did. That's why I'm not asking you to do anymore. Right? But just to bring your messy self in here so that I can help you feel held. So this is huge for me because at some point during my work with her, I just realized one day that I didn't have to be the good client anymore. I found a container where my nervous system was being tracked in real time. So let's say you're already in therapy. What if you already have a good rapport, but you realize that you're still stuck in that audition mode that we talked about? If you have found a safe foundation with your therapist, then you can actually use this relationship to practice authenticity over attachment. You can ask for a different experience by being honest about the performance. So here is what this might look like in practice. You can name the performance. So the next time you're in session and you feel yourself reporting on your life with clinical precision, I invite you to pause and say something like, I'm noticing right now that I'm being the smart client. I'm explaining my trauma to you, but I don't actually feel connected to what I'm saying. So would you mind if we stopped for a second? And I can use, again, another example from my own work in therapy that, we had gone through several sessions of EMDR, and this was still the beginning stages of my somatic practicing. And so when she would say, where do you feel this in your body? I at first would give some answer like, oh, I feel it in my stomach. I didn't feel it in my stomach. I was still very much in my head. And so after a few sessions, I worked up the courage and I said, okay, I have to be honest with you. Like I feel so disconnected right now. And whenever you ask me, I'm worried that you're going to think that I'm not trying and that I'm not invested in this. But I am so removed and detached from my body, and probably have been my whole entire life, that I don't know how to answer that. And it was like, she was so relieved that I had finally called myself out on my own shit, that she was like, yeah, I kind of suspected that, but I didn't want to say anything to you at first. But thank you so much for being honest with me. That's so helpful. And what that tells me is you need more practice with resourcing, feeling resourced, locating things in your body, slowing down. And I just was so grateful for the response because it was not judgmental. She was not disappointed in me. In fact, I was praised for being messy and honest. So something else you might try is requesting somatic tracking. So what this might mean is that you can explicitly ask your therapist to help you stay in your body. So much like I did, you could try saying like, I tend to stay very intellectual. So the next time you see me start to talk faster or move into like explaining mode, can you help me by interrupting me? Like I just like to pause and notice what's happening in my body instead. And again, this is really brave, vulnerable work to be the client and to say, I'm not getting what I think I'm supposed to be getting from this experience. And it's not because I'm doing it wrong. It's just that I don't have a lot of practice with this. And so I need you to help me with this. And that's what she's there for, or he's there for, right? And so I always appreciate it when clients can verbalize that to me, because it gives me an indication of dissociation or ways that this client might need a little bit more support. And then finally, this is something else, the fawn disclosure. So if you find yourself agreeing with your therapist just to be easy, I would challenge you to call it out and say, I just realized that I said this makes sense because I wanted to be a good client, but I actually didn't feel connected to that. Can we go back? Again, on the therapist side, I love when my clients do this because it helps me know that they are really turning a corner in their growth, especially for my fawners. You know, like, hey, I was really scared to ask for some more appointment availability, but this time that you suggested doesn't work for me. And I'm really trying to work on, not having to part the seas to keep my appointments. And so could you give me some more options? That's huge progress for people who are used to fawning. And when you do this, again, I cannot emphasize this enough. You are not being a difficult client. What you're really actually doing is the deepest work of CPTSD recovery, stopping the audition. You are testing the container to see if it can hold your authentic needs and not just your performance. As Deb Dana teaches, your nervous system responds to safety, not words. So by asking for what you need, you are co-creating a space where you can finally stop tracking the therapist and start finding yourself. So if your therapist is a good fit, then you will know this because they will meet this request with curiosity. They want to be in that container with you. And if they get defensive or dismissive, then guess what? That is valuable data too, because it tells you that the container might be too small for the version of you that is finished with this auditioning phase. And then it frees you up to move on to find a better fit. Finally, with key takeaway number 3, your inner protector is actually a loyal witness and not a flaw. So this final blind spot is how we view our people-pleasing itself. Most of us walk into therapy wanting to fix our tendency to accommodate. We see it as a weakness or a bad habit that we picked up along the way. But I want to offer you a different lens. As I've shared here before and will continue to share, your people-pleasing is a nervous system strategy. It is what Pete Walker and Ingrid Clayton call the fawn response. And when you were 13, navigating a father whose love was conditional and a mother who was frequently institutionalized, fawning was not a choice. Fawning was a biological necessity. You learn to abandon yourself in relationship because at that time, survival depended on it. As Dr. Gabor Mate again often says, that when a child is forced to choose between being authentic and staying attached to their caregivers, they will choose attachment every single time. Your inner protector is the part of you that still believes that if you are not good or quiet or helpful, then you will be abandoned. Healing isn't about getting rid of this part of you. You do not exile a protector who has worked this hard for 40 plus years, in my case. Instead, we learn to lead it with softness and stillness and slowness, just like that container that is created and given to us in a therapy space that is a good fit. So in my own work, this meant finally telling that 13-year-old version of me, honey, the audition is over. You don't have to track the room anymore. I'm here and I'm holding the container now. And when you stop fighting your protector and you start witnessing it, the urgency to please others begins to lift. And you start making decisions from true intuition rather than old familiar fear. So I thought that I would give some homework this week. And in the essence of not performing, I titled this homework the 5-minute D roll. Okay, I want you to try something really small. Many of us are so used to auditioning for the world that we don't even realize we are still wearing the costume of the good client or the capable one long after the conversation has ended. And so the practice is, if you are currently in therapy, or maybe you're just having a conversation with someone who you feel like could be a therapist, the next time you finish that session, that meeting, or even that stressful phone call where you felt yourself managing the other person's emotions, I want you to take exactly 5 minutes of intentional softness, stillness, and slowness. Number 1, stop the reporting. Don't call anybody to tell them how it went. Don't check your email. Don't analyze what you said or you didn't say. Find a physical anchor. So put a hand on your chest or your belly and ask the question. And in my case, ask that 13-year-old part of me. The audition is over for now. What do we actually need in this moment? And it doesn't always have to be deep. Maybe you need a glass of water. Maybe you need to just sit in the car in total silence. Maybe you need to cry because being on for that long was so exhausting. The goal isn't to fix the people-pleasing part of you, right? The goal is simply to acknowledge that the performance is done. You are practicing the shift from tracking them back to tracking you. And remember, you are showing up, and that is enough. You do not have to earn the right to exist once the session is over. And finally, I'll just say another shout out to my badass therapist. I will never break up with her. Is that, when our time is done, she always reminds me, especially after an intense session, like, please don't go and continue therapy part 2. And in fact, please don't go straight home if you don't have to. Like, give yourself 10, 15, 20 minutes more if you have it, and go do something for yourself. Like, go practice emptying all the things that you just emptied out in here into that safe space and contain it. We're not sweeping it under the rug. We're not throwing it in the trash. We're putting it in that container and we're putting it on a shelf or somewhere safe until it's time to do more work. And I remember the first time she said that to me and I was like, damn, that's big. No one has ever given me that directive before. Like, I'll gladly follow that. So let's just review the roadmap again before we wrap. 3 keys to reclaiming yourself. I want to leave you with these 3 markers to look for as you navigate your own healing practice. And these are shifts, again, that move us from surviving our lives to actually living in them. And number 1, again, is shifting from awareness to integration. Remember that knowing your story it's just a map. That's it. True healing isn't another audition where you have to prove that you've done the work. It is the moment you move out of your head and into a body that finally feels safe enough to just exist without an explanation. Number 2, look for attunement, not just analysis. So if you feel like you are disappearing in your therapy sessions, you might be missing the container. So before breaking up with your therapist, unless you just feel really strongly that he or she is not a good fit, look for or ask for that brain-to-brain tracking where you feel met in real time. Healing happens in the safety of the relationship, not just the accuracy of the advice. And number 3, honor your protector as a witness. So that urge to people please or overfunction isn't a defect. It is a loyal strategy that helped that 13-year-old version of me survive deep, deep unpredictability. When we lead with softness and stillness and slowness, we are not fixing ourselves. We are showing that inner protector that the audition is over and it is safe to come home. So just as a final thought, as you go into your week, keep that 5-minute D-roll in your back pocket. Give yourself permission to stop the performance as soon as the door closes. You have spent enough of your life tracking the world, and it's time to start tracking you. You are showing up, and that is enough. So I'm grateful that you joined me today for this full-length episode, and I hope you will stick around for Wednesday's midweek reframe, where I'm going to extend on what we talked about today. And I'll be talking about the vulnerability hangover. So that post-session spiral that we sometimes can get into when we dissect conversations that felt risky and vulnerable. So I hope that you will tune in. It's going to be a great one, and take care of yourself this week, and I'll see you back here soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you leave feeling a little lighter, a little more grounded, and a little closer to trusting yourself and your inner experience. If this episode resonated with you, please follow or subscribe so future conversations can meet you when they're needed. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. That's one of the ways this work reaches the people who need it the most. You can find me on Instagram at Cindy Payne Rooted, and you can also visit me at cindypayne.com, where you'll find all episode links, blog posts, practice updates, and a free people-pleasing style quiz designed to help you notice your patterns with more compassion. And remember, every small step towards healing, self-trust, and presence matters. You are worthy of this journey. Thanks, everyone.